So, my name's Don Robinson, founder of Greening of Streaming. There's many members in the room. Most of them have the, I think, honour of wearing one of our little badges, so you can pick them out. And there's lots of affiliates and people who know the organisation well who work alongside us and get involved. So do sort of network afterwards. We're going to go down to the beach for some informal catch-up, nothing arranged, but just a chance to talk more about this subject. And I'm just really delighted that thanks a lot to Barbara and Lisa for getting this slot for us here, but also congrats to them for getting sustainability into the IBC agenda generally. There's lots of sessions, get across it. We do have a sort of finger on many of them, so if you think you want to get more, come and ask us and we'll try and find out a little bit more. So I'm going to rattle through. Can I just get the, I've got a clicker, haven't I? I can take control. Right, this is us. This is Greening of Streaming. It's always a slightly dynamic landscape, this slide. It changes from month to month, but typically we're growing about one member every other month at the moment. If you come from the the consumer side of the broadcast industry, some of these names just won't mean much to you. Maybe Intel, AMD, Microsoft you've heard of. But if you're in the infrastructure side of delivering streaming, making streaming happen, many of these names will be familiar to you. And I'm really, really proud that Greening of Streaming has that collective voice with so many strong voices. I think at times we probably carry, I don't know, there's a few actors on there that I think between us we're probably producing, I don't know, half of all internet content at some peak times. So I think it's a strong voice. So what we're going to cover today, a quick intro to Greening of Streaming from me. I'll try not to talk too much. Those of you who know me know that's unlikely. But I'll try not to talk too much. And then we're going to introduce our low energy sustainable streaming Accord projects. And each of our project leads are going to come and talk to the first three of those. Unfortunately, you've got me for project 4, but I'll explain why when we get there. And then right at the end, because a lot of people want to know how to get in touch with us, keep up with what we're doing and so on, I'd like to invite a few of the people who are helping us do that outreach, come and talk to you about their sustainability projects, their media outlets, the podcasts and various things that we're sponsoring to ensure that people are aware of us, but also to support the general movement of awareness of these issues in the industry. And then at 4 we're going to the beach, which I think means something to me anyway. Okay, so what's Greening of Streaming? I'm tempted to read all of this because it's become a sort of collective blurb that we've put together as a group, so I am going to read it out for the sake of the recording. We're a members association formed from the stream encoding and distribution operators and technology service providers with the intention to make real changes through education and engineering through the deployment and propagation of best practices. We're a forum for our members to discuss internally and externally issues focused primarily on energy efficiency in the streaming sector. As a key growing use of the internet, streaming has become the tail that wags the dog of large telco and broadcast infrastructures. Greening of Streaming is ensuring there's a focus on energy and fundamentally also on the sustainability of the sector. We do this by forming and driving working group activities which are led by our members, and we've also introduced the Less Accord projects which are open to non-member participation by invitation from the membership. These focus on specific areas that the industry as a whole feel need collective attention. So this is our scope. It's been beautifully reprinted in Sympties magazine. Neil, what's it called? Scotty's publication, which has just come out. You can pick it up on the bridge. This is a diagram we stood up in our working group 4 to really highlight how many physical boxes are plugged in to make a stream get from, have I got a laser? I have, look, to get from the encoders here all the way through the contribution network, through into the core exchanges, into the CDNs, out into the operator's CDNs, back out into the access networks, and then right down into the home or into the consumer environment on the right-hand side. So that's the scope of work that I think that picture best depicts for Greening of Streaming. We do get asked about production. Well, I think this boundary here moves into production quite a bit. So more and more people are using cloud techniques and cloud technologies to do their production. So it's not a very hard and fast line in terms of the delineation of traditional structures in the industry, but this is where the kit is, this is what the engineers engineer, this is where the software engineers work. It all gets a bit complicated, and one of my aims in the next few minutes is to try to make it simple, not just for the audience, but also for our members, because frankly, there is so much going on in Greening of Streaming that even I struggle to keep up. We call everything by WG4 and WG8 because we know what they mean. It's easy to forget that other people don't, but it's also very longhand to start writing 30 emails a day using expressions like event energy measurement and so on. So Working Group 4 has become our shorthand. We've got 9 working groups which up and running. So they span from the lexicon working group, which is fun, it's quite philosophical. We're looking at terms like what means, and you think that's an SI number, it just has a definition, but when you actually start talking to different actors in different areas in the industry, we start using these numbers in slightly different ways. We measure some things in kilowatt hours and some in amps and voltage, and we have to actually try to normalize that so we're all sort of singing from the same hymn sheet. We did an interesting survey on what power off, sleep and standby mean to engineers. We had over 50 responses and no two were the same. So when somebody says, just put it to sleep, it doesn't really mean anything unless you're explicit. So that working group is fun. It is very informal and quite philosophical. Should really meet on the beach every fortnight, but we can't do that. So working group 2's outreach. That'll be covered in a little bit more depth in our last 10 minutes. But it's all about raising awareness amongst engineers and people in the industry about these issues. Working group 3, which Barbara runs, is our best practices working group. So the aim of the group, if you like. But we're 18 months from being able to even suggest what best practice is, because we really are only at the beginning of the journey in terms of measurement, which is really the first stage. So that doubles up as our governance group, and we also respond to public calls for input on things like BEREC's regulatory policy or Ofcoms and so on and so forth. So the forthcoming CSRD regulations are going to be something that this autumn we're going to develop a position paper as a group on. Working group 4, 6 and 8, I'll come back to in a second. So working group 5, Anthony, raise your hand, he's there. He's running the audio working groups, a sort of specific subset, just looking at the audio streaming space. Working group 7, Christoph, he's there, yeah, brilliant. So that's really focused on our interaction with standards organisations. We're not aspiring to be one, we're a user group, we're invigorating the conversation, but there are many really good standards organisations of all sorts out there, and we've got great liaison and affiliation with many of them. We want to get those standards organisations to think about energy as a primary KPI, primary design principle, not retrospectively fit it back into the industry after all the streaming infrastructure has been built. And then working group 9 is a forming working group where we're coalescing interactions with Will, he's there, with the academic community and other peer groups who ultimately have great climate science models, but don't necessarily have access to industry data. And we are very much about trying to source and generate that industry data so we can make engineering decisions. Okay, I skipped over the big three, and this has actually emerged organically rather than by intent, but we have these three, what I'm beginning to call pillar working groups, 4, 6, and 8. So 4 set about to try to understand something that's a big question in the industry, which is what is the correlation between traffic and energy? And so a big part of that work has been to look at big events like the World Cup or big sporting events or big, whatever it may be, software distributions and so on. Try to track those through the systems and at the same time try to measure the energy of those systems and see if there's a correlating bump when we get a big spike. So far, all the early data we've got shows it's completely flat. So this is, if you're working in a world of trying to reduce gigabytes, then Rudolph's laughing at the back there. If you're living in a world of trying to reduce gigabytes, this is a big discussion. It appears that networks are inelastic. They do not shrink down because we're not sending data. They stay at a fixed capacity, and that capacity is actually set by your peak planning, and as Simon's project will outline a bit more, peak planning is planned years and decades in advance, and so that peak is very high. And so we're not necessarily even getting close to that when we're running something as spiky as the World Cup. So these are really big, interesting tests and questions and things that we're setting out to experimentally see with some of the largest content delivery networks. Working Group 6, which Sam is running, and he's also running Project 2, so you'll hear from him. Where's Sam? He's gone. Please be here. Yeah. Which Sam's running is one space we are sure of we do a lot of in streaming is encoding. It's kind of the start of the streaming chain. We know that not encoding doesn't use CPUs, so it doesn't use energy, and encoding can use a lot of CPUs. So we're going into a deep dive and an investigation on initially how we all get into the same reference plane for that. Sam will talk more about that in a minute. And then finally, Working Group 8, with Ben is running, has kicked off in the last few months. I'm super proud on a bit of work we've done in the last week on that, which is just trying to harmonise how all the different labs have been testing, because an innocent question from us, what meter are you using, elicited different responses from all the different test groups. So we are getting everyone to use the same meter and bring that data back to us, so we've got some feedback to work with. So that's the big picture. On the right, I drew a sort of parallel. streaming kind of is distribution, transcoding, encoding, and decoding. It's kind of those three building blocks are central to streaming. There's something obvious on here which is missing, which is storage. We are going to come back to storage. Storage complicates things because you get into an asynchronicity of timing. It's difficult to really go that World Cup event spread over 3 weeks of on-demand viewing. How did that work? It's a much more complicated problem. So we're starting with the basics in on the linear streaming and so on and so forth. So those workflows, sorry, that workflow modeling as it's settled out, then maps into the lesser chord projects. And even internally, people go, how does this, where's the scope with this lesser chord project and so on? So this diagram's super complicated. Take a deep breath. I'm not going to go through it in detail. It's actually not as difficult as it looks. The light green boxes are the same light green boxes on this slide. Okay, so they're the working groups, and they're kind of a bit closed door. They're a privilege of membership. They're the Chatham House space where our members get together and talk in engineering terms without their business bods over the shoulders and without everyone else getting into and interfering with good old engineering. So we get into a room, we talk about the white issues or the boxes in the white boxes here. Those are the sort of discussion threads that are going on in our groups. The caching at the top there is to do, I hasten to add. So these bright green boxes are the lesser chord projects. So at the beginning of this year, we went out and we spoke with lots of help from all of the industry associations. We spoke to probably thousands of engineers and said, right, we're going to ask you some tricky questions. The principal ones coming out of Working Group 6, which is essentially, does compression strategy change energy strategy? Does reducing a bit rate reduce energy? Does changing your quality change your energy dynamic? And so the lesser chord then evolved into a set of discussions with all these engineers, just essentially saying, what's your instinct, folks? Imagine that we don't know what the data is, but you work with this stuff every day. What's your instinct? What are the areas that you think we might be able to make a direct impact as engineers? I'm just going to pause for 1 second because I skipped over something which I forget sometimes, and I think it's important. In greening of streaming, we don't talk about carbon very much, which might be a bit of a surprise given that we're supposed to be all about sustainability and so on. What we found is I can't find any engineers who know what the carbon is. It's just impossible to relate what you do as a software engineer to carbon. You can do it through n orders of abstraction and it gets really confusing. We focus on kilowatt hours because we can read it from meters. We can take that as a data set that we can actually operationally feed back on. It's also good for the climate denying finance guys because it reduces their costs. So the tree huggers are happy as well. So it's a perfect balance. So we focus there. We are forming strong collaboration and more with other groups, and some of them are in the room, to try to get them that industry data and ask them with their climate science approach to iterate that data through their models and explain to us how our industry is affecting the climate. And that's not to ignore the fact that in our working groups, we also have AMDs, Intel, other silicon vendors, kit vendors, who sit in these working groups and tap us on the shoulder and say, you do realize if you do that, we're going to run out of this particular rare earth material long before that becomes a reality. And that's all part of the story, but we can't frontline on that because we don't, on a day-to-day basis, operate with carbon. So we're focused on energy, and a lot of this stuff is about real-world energy measurement. So I think at that point it's worth just touching base on the top line of the projects. These were the projects we announced in June at our European Parliament interface with BEREC, which was the end of the sort of call for input from the industry. The aim had been over the summer to find some project leads to take forward those projects. And then over this next 6-month period up to NAB, we're going to try and get our hands dirty and run some of these projects and see if we can find some output. So I'm not going to take any wind out of the project leads' sails. I'm just going to ask them to come up and talk a little bit about how they're going to lead those projects. And I'm deeply honoured, we've got a new volunteer secretariat member who joined this week, who's also been involved with the background discussions of this project since June. Simon Jones, well, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I'm very pleased to have Simon part of this. So, Simon, please come and take the stage.
Okay, thank you, Dom. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. There's the magic button. Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated to join this piece of work. Come from BT as a distinguished engineer, a lot of experience in TV distribution from very, very early video on demand trials up to large scaling delivery of sports content with BT Sport. So I have been tasked or accepted the task to look at the intelligent distribution shifting. Now, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to look at the different modes of delivery and work out which one is best. great, very simple starting point, but you need to really do a lot of work underneath it to understand exactly what the three methods we're going to look at. Unicast, which is kind of ubiquitous, is used for everything. Peer-to-peer, it started with a lot of bad history with Napster and things like that, but it's out there, it is efficient, it does do some good work. And network layer multicast, which is a traditional multicast used in set-top boxes and IPTV. Very, very efficient, very, very effective at delivering content at volume. So, that's it. So, the key activities really will be to define those different models, to actually understand what we mean, maybe simplify, maybe reduce the scope a bit. Unicast is a really big area, so can we just actually bring that scope down a little to actually break the problem up into something we can solve? Look at the energy models for them, and I think Dom already touched upon the problem, is there's a very non-linear relationship between streaming demand and energy consumed. Very, very non-linear, which we have to work through. Identify what can be measured, because we may not have all the answers. We may not know exactly how many kilowatt hours per terabit per second capacity is consumed in the network, and does it change? And then let's look at what the parameters are to actually influence a choice. How do we make sure we're using the most optimal and efficient, and therefore energy efficient solution? So those are takeaways from the June discussion. When it talks about things like the target devices, I think we're less in this project concerned around, is it a TV, is it a set-top box? It's what network capabilities has it got? Can it consume multicast? You've got Apple TV, it doesn't consume multicast. You've got a Samsung TV, it could in theory, but you create an app that wants to try and use it, you've got a big barrier. So maybe there's things that we need to do to influence the devices there. Quality of service, absolutely important. And then, consider how the distribution model could affect other traffic. If you prioritize multicast, gets out there and your voice service goes, not the right answer. So, voice, particularly emergency voice, is really crucial. As you can tell, I come from a network operator there. So, what are the distribution models? Unicast, I think we can split it down into open internet. That's the backbone of connectivity. But I think key to this sort of work will be CDN, where you actually manage the distribution, you manage the points of replication. Peer-to-peer, managed peer-to-peer, I don't know much about that, guys. So if anyone knows about managed peer-to-peer, I'm welcome. I want to listen, because I really want to understand how that works.
Listen to highlight, we've got a member contributing.
Yeah, I was aware of that. But and then, peer-to-peer, BitTorrent is great for downloading Unix distributions, but it's a bit of a specialist use case. And then multicast, is there open internet? Can you actually multicast all over the internet? It's not that easy. Lots of operators put in boundaries. It doesn't work that well. Whereas traditional operator multicast, live trading, very crucial services and video delivery. And then we've got to look at really, where do we actually replicate? Where are we sending a single stream, or where are we sending multiple streams? Where do we actually start to scale the demands on our network as the consumption demands scale? In the CDN caches, that they will be where the streams terminate. If they're in the internet peering, then it means that every stream over every internet service provider for every customer they serve is replicated. Whereas you move your caches further to the end user, then you actually reduce the traffic on parts of the network. Peer-to-peer, is there anything in there about the stream coming up through a switch and back down through the same switch that could actually be beneficial? And then you've got the operator managed multicast, combination of static multicast and dynamic. Static means you send everything everywhere, but only one copy. Dynamic means you've got a lot of states. You've got to remember who's consuming what, and that's been, I think, one of the perceived barriers for the deployment of multicast in internet service providers. Then I think we've got to look at the content types, because you can use multicast to distribute a file, but it means everyone gets it at the same speed, which is really not what a games operator wants. If you want the latest version of the game, you want it as quickly and as soon as you can get it. So let's kind of, these are just proposals. We'll take these into the group. We can discuss them. This is nothing hard and fast here. This is just how do we start this project? Let's put some ideas out. Let's see what happens to them. You've got live streaming. video streaming, you've got live and channel streaming. The difference here is that you as an end user choose what you want to watch, but the service determines what point in time you're watching. You want to watch it live, or it's what that channel has at that point in time. And that's clearly a case where multicast will work because you've got viewers consuming the same thing at the same time. Video on demand is really where, the Netflix, your content, you're consuming it as and when you want it in your own way. And I think for download, let's decouple the viewing. Put it out there. It doesn't matter when it arrives. What matters on download is it's there before you want to consume it. And that's ideal for game downloads. You want to play that game when it's launched in the service. But if it arrived yesterday, but you get the key to use it today, that's the important point. So then we'll try and map those. CDNs will work for all of them. Multicast, live streaming, really good at that, and then peer-to-peer. So that's the sort of piece of work. I don't know what to do next, so let's put some hypotheses up. Let's sort of put something out there. I think it's a number of network elements carrying a stream that will be the differentiation point. If multicast, you only have one input stream and then one output stream on every port of a switch. Whereas with unicast, for live streaming, from that CDN, it's sending out everywhere a version to each end user. So if you've got multiple users, you'll get multiple streams in the network. I don't think, and it's a hypothesis, that the individual stream bandwidth will actually be a differentiator between the services. So we'll take that out there and test that. And I think, as all been said there, I think the relationship between network traffic and energy consumption is a nonlinear function. So it's going to be, as Dom said earlier, the installed network capacity driven by the peak viewing demands and peak internet demands that set the current power. Now, I would say that was absolutely true a couple of years ago, but I think there's a lot of equipment manufacturers, some in this room, who are very actively working on their switch design, working on their infrastructure design to actually make it much more dynamic, much more flexible. But if they're talking about it now, it'll become a product in a little while, and then operators are fairly slow at refreshing their infrastructure. But what it does mean is there could be a future where the network is dynamic and flexible, but I don't think that it's there now. So that's it. Then, just a little bit here. Can we actually draw some diagrams? Can we actually do some comparatives? It's a very simple Excel model for comparing the number of network elements that a stream goes through between core and edge. I'm not talking about access, I'm not talking about there. And it basically shows that, clearly multicast offers some great benefits in the number of network elements that it touches. Number of network elements drives installed capacity drives power, but that's where we are to date. So, I'm sure these will be shared. You can critique this, and the more critique, the better. Not criticism, but critique. Then really, next steps. Let's get involved, come up with the ideas. I'm just starting on this project, just moving, as Dom said, joining Greening and Streaming to lead this. So really welcome any input and contribution for everybody. Over to you, Dom.
That's great. Thanks, Simon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so obviously I'd better stand up here, otherwise the camera will only get the bottom half of me. So obviously if you want any slides or contact with Simon or any of the other project leads or anyone involved, just get in touch with me, or you can reach out on info@greeningandstreaming.org. Sam, do you want to come talk about Project 2?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Sam Orton-Jay. I'm working product management for vNova, and I've been sort of in or around video compression for a long time. So that's sort of where I come to this whole challenge from. So I chair working group 6, which, as you probably saw, is all around what we can do in the world of compression and decompression to improve the sustainability of our delivery. And if we get into project number 2, I'm going to move this way so I can see it a little bit myself. We've, over the last year actually, in working group 6, we've done quite a lot of work to map out really quite possibly a much longer project. But what we've got here to start things off is really the sort of groundwork that we need, which, as Dom sort of alluded to already, a lot of it's about measurement at this stage. We know in compression we've got some fairly big levers to pull, because transcoding uses a lot of energy. It's a very compute-intensive process. So we know there are things we could do to just make a transcoding process use less energy. But we also have these big questions about, and I think if you went back a few years, a lot of people would have just thought, well, let's just get the bit rate lower. Let's reduce the bit rate because surely that will save energy everywhere. But as we've been touching on already, it's definitely not as linear as that, and we really don't know where the benefits are. From our, and I'll sort of jump straight to the end, the last step of this, which is slightly separate from the others. From our discussions in Brussels a few weeks ago, we came to the view that potentially a lot of the savings around reducing bit rate would be actually in deferring the sort of CapEx investment into new infrastructure. So everything is provisioned for peak, but if we could reduce the bit rate of everything we were streaming, we could potentially defer that investment and save loads of embedded emissions in the process. So a sort of side part of Project 2, which is really a sort of interface to other activities, is to encourage this discussion and hopefully move a few different groups into really investing in some proper analysis of, if we reduced the amount of data we're streaming, just how much energy could we save in that area? Because that really starts to answer this question of how much benefit could we get if we just concentrate on reducing bit rate. But to go back to the top, which would be the usual way to present slides, the other pieces we really need to know are to get a sense of the profile of energy usage, particularly around the compression piece. So step one here is to try to agree a sort of consensus framework, if you like, for how we measure encoding or transcoding energy usage, what power, which initially might seem like a relatively simple question if you think about sort of live server-based encoders. We've got some major vendors here that run those. It's probably not that difficult to work out how much energy they use per hour, and lots of them quote what they use. But if you broaden that out into software-based encoding running on public cloud infrastructure, where it's not so easy to figure out what's running underneath, or perhaps GPU-based encoding, imagine sort of GPU infrastructure in the cloud as well, actually getting to the nuts and bolts of what power they're using, and finding a good common way to measure that, less easy. So within Working Group 6 and within this project, we're going to try to work with, we already have some great sort of encoding specialist members, try to work together to figure out how we do some of that. So that would be the transcoding energy measurement. We're also going to try and leverage some of the work, particularly happening in Working Group 8, where we're looking at the consumer playback end of things, the device power consumption, to get a sense of those measurements. And if we put those two things together with the third bullet point, which is to try to, at some stage soon, survey as many of the services and operator services as we can to get a sense of, even if it's asking fairly simple questions about how many hours of content do you transcode per month, for example, and how much do you have on the consumption? Do you have if maybe it's 2 million hours of smart TV consumption, 3 million hours of mobile phone, 1 million hours of set-top box, you get the idea. If we can get this high-level profile of different services, how much they're transcoding and how much consumption there is, we can put that together with some of the initial energy measurement of those, of the sort of client side and the encoder side, and really start to get a sense of the ratio of the two. And of course, if we have this, start to have this good sense of where the power consumption is, what this ratio really looks like, and also what the benefits would be for reducing the amount of traffic we're actually pushing out. That's the That's the groundwork that we then need to be able to strategize about how we compress video to save energy, because that will tell us, is it mostly about reducing bitrate, or is it not about that at all, or is it really just looking at how we're running our transcoding and how much we're doing, perhaps to answer the questions. So it's very much groundwork, but it's critical to enable the next stages. And there are documents elsewhere to read if you're interested in sort of what the plan would be further downstream. And I'm keeping it pretty short. So the next steps with Project 2, I'm hoping to really get things moving very quickly on what we will, in my working group, focus on around drafting, trying to figure out this sort of measurement framework, how we go about doing that, and start once we've got something in place. Aim to try and start actually gathering some data by the end of the year would be my target. And of course, probably the most important thing here is this is a big appeal for participation and support. So particularly if you're in the encoding space, or if you know useful people, whether it's open source encoders, the big encoder vendors and so on, the more the merrier. We'd love to get that sort of industry support so that we have a good way of measuring things. And the last part, yes, as I said, this discussion about deferring infrastructure investment to save energy, how much we could potentially achieve by reducing the bit rates of what we stream. Also looking for people to get involved in that discussion and maybe try and formalize some research around it. Perfect. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, Sam, thank you. Arian.
So, my name is Arjan Koster, working nowadays with TNO. Before that, I worked for an incumbent telco in the Netherlands, working for ages already in media distribution, video coding, and that kind of stuff. And when switching over to TNO, I wanted to, help on reducing the amount of power that our industry is using up. So that's basically the story that I'm starting here. So this is about Project 3. It's called Breadcrumbs. I was not there when the name came about, but I imagine it is something to do with a fairy tale of Hans and Gretel.
See you later.
Yeah, okay, but imagine that those breadcrumbs can also follow what you are doing. So the previous speaker spoke already about all kind of measurements that we're going to do. And here the idea is that that kind of data is also being carried over the network, following basically the media stream, and preferably also is being bounced back so that all parties in the whole field can see in their chain or chains, if you are a streaming provider, what is all happening there. And this is going to give you quite some interesting use cases. Of course, an end user can see after he has watched, or she has watched a YouTube movie. Well, this is the amount of energy that is being used to get it to you and to display things. There is going to be some public that has interest in that, but there are also other use cases if all that data goes back to, for instance, the same content distributor. That content distributor will then see, well, I have these millions of devices that are being used. Many of them are the same, but are on older CDNs, and they will see differences, that some CDNs use more power than others. But they also will see that for some movies, some of the devices are behaving really strange. And this is, I've seen that before at KPN, that sometimes some particular devices do funny things with some content, so it's not unlikely that this is going to happen again. So then you can start asking the questions that we can start now, but we are nowhere near an answer. Why is this device using for only this piece of content much more energy than it normally does. And yeah, being able to signal that and ask then to the engineers what is happening. So they're going to look at the device. Maybe there is some hardware bug there. Maybe it's related to the encoding, which causes that hardware bug to produce more energy. But maybe it's also related to the network. You don't know. It's going to be nice engineering, root cause analysis. And well, I think as soon as we are going to have this kind of thing, well, lots of engineers are going to have a lot of fun doing that kind of activity. We try to set up some diagram, not as complex as Don started with, fairly simple. Let's call it the starting point, because yeah, all the stuff that has Don in his diagram, well, has to be added at some point in time so that you really have a good overview. We put in some things from a pragmatics point of view, like data converters and power meters and things like that, particularly for the in-home part, because that is more tough to get energy readings in software and things like that, we assume, than in, well, the professional equipment. So this is about what we aim to do. Yeah, and well, we need other parties to be involved, to adapt maybe player technology, get some software on systems, make sure that we well, get those breadcrumbs rolling. I want to conclude here.
Perfect, Aaron, thank you. So you've got me again for a few minutes. Actually, just going to say a quick comment about the breadcrumbs, why it was named breadcrumbs. So some of you will know Will Law from Akamai, principal architect. He's very well known across the sector, very involved with the Dash and the HLS specs and so on and so forth. He nicknamed the project the Breadcrumbs Project because historically, circular economy feedback to the end consumer has typically taken the whole system energy and divided it by the number of users. That's basically how the maths is sort of at a very high level being done. We wanted to proposition a thought experiment more than anything, which is, as a file passes through a system, what if we do something a little bit like we've done in Packet, in the sort of various different packet networking things. We've moved the state to the header of the datagram rather than storing it in the router as the datagram passes. So that's possibly a bit succinct and technical, but the point is that if we can stick a meter into a file, and as the file gets encoded, it'll use some kilowatt hours. As it sits on a storage network, it'll clock up some more kilowatt hours. And as it goes through to the end user, it ends up in the end user showing what the aggregate of all the systems is in one user, rather than dividing it all. It will look horrific if you download two files through the same workflow in parallel, because it'll look like you've just doubled the entire electricity grid's power into the telecoms network. But as a thought exercise, that is actually how much power that file will have used in getting through the network to you. Even if it used a gigawatt, so one MP3 sitting on a gigawatt of infrastructure uses a gigawatt. You can't turn that gigawatt off. So it's a bit of a thought experiment at looking at different measurement, at different vectors of interpreting the measurement, in the hope that we shake something out of it that we can both use in engineering terms, but also persist with that circular economy feedback to the consumer, because we do get quite, all of us get asked, oh, well, what do we do with the consumer in this space? How do we involve them? Really, there's not a lot they can do apart from turn stuff off at the moment. But in time, maybe we can actually give some different perception on that. Maybe we can explain why we're doing things in the industry. So that was why breadcrumbs. Anyway, right, so Project 4. Project 4 is very visceral, very tangible, but finding a project lead for this one's going to take a while, frankly, because this one, you can't do it without a significant amount of investment and capex. It's not something we can bootstrap into our own members' networks or our friends' networks and so on. It's all about hardware and hardware optimization and the physical stuff that's sitting underneath the streaming. So let's look at these in two halves. We've got a system like a local micro scale, which is on the left here. Which is looking at the encoding servers, the bits of tin, the computers that we actually use ourselves. So I'm really interested, and I'm pushing this one quite hard. Immersion cooling is cool. It's interesting. It's not just cool, it's interesting. Basically, for those of you that haven't seen it before, I was quite shocked when somebody took a £20,000 server on a video that and showed me the video of this, took a £20,000 server and lowered it into a tank of oil. I was like, what the hell are you doing? That's counterintuitive to anything in my bones. But basically, the tank has like a 35-watt fish tank pump, which drives the oil round off to a heat sink. And in that particular case, they're converting it into municipal swimming pool heating. So they're reusing the lost energy. Taking the fans off the computer took 30% off the power of the system. Taking the fans out of the air conditioning took another 30% out of their entire system, and it shrunk the data center or increased the capacity of the data center, whichever way you want to look at it. So immersion cooling, big promise, really interesting. Anyone got a 20 grand server they'd like to lend to us to test? Please let me know, because that's why Project 4 is taking a little bit of time to get off the ground. But it's really, that's an area I think could be quite transformative. And then I'm going to give them a plug. They're not a member, but they did a really interesting bit of work at Robert's Fraunhofer, the Focus event that Fraunhofer threw earlier this year. Zatu spoke and really blew me away. They're doing a cool project. They discovered you can stick 90 servers in a windmill. Right? So there's a lot of pre-built data center space out there with electricity on site. And the high-level bit of thinking here is it's easier to get data to a windmill than it is to get the energy from a windmill to a data center. And that's really critical. So why is that useful for us? Well, the project we want to run is we want to, hopefully we're talking with Scottish Enterprise, but any country that's got 14,000 spare windmills that would like to play, they're very welcome to talk to me as well. Basically, we want to find a group of windmills where we can stick some transcoders, some of our members' transcoders in the base. And we want to find, last year's cat videos and transfer them to the windmills. Transcode them when the wind blows, because when the wind blows, these things have too much energy. They can't get rid of it. They've just got surplus free electricity. Transcode the back catalogue up to AV17 or whatever the latest codec is, and then transfer it back to the storage network. So essentially do one of the hardest jobs in our sector, which is those big library transcodes, to do that for free on fully renewable energy. So quite a fun project. We're sort of reaching out. I was looking for an image to explain this to you. I found this image, which really well depicts what I wanted, because it teams at PRTG and Pasta, who I've credited at the bottom, were very happy to let me use the image. Want to follow up because it seems to be what they're doing. They're putting data centers into windmills, and so fingers crossed we've taken a bit of a step forward. But Project 4 will take either an enormous amount of magic capex to come out of somewhere to drive forward, or it's going to take blagging a lot of goodwill out of people with this kit who want to show our industry why this is the way forward. But the principle is, can we move the workload to the renewable energy? That's the basic fundamental in that side of the project. So, yeah, please get involved if you're in the hardware space. That's a fun one, but it's a slow burner. So, a few minutes for Q&A, and then we're going to talk to some of our outreach community. So, I'm going to pause, and it don't have to be questions for me. There can be questions for any of the project leads, or indeed any of the group. Let's take a few questions. I'm looking at the press at the front row here. The pens have stopped. Go on then. I knew you'd have one question. Here you go.
Well, you mentioned Fraunhofer's project. So, hey, Robert. So he could probably explain it way better than me. But my question is, aren't you guys a bit like competing on the same stuff? Like he has a measurement project from start to finish, and you're trying to do that with a different 4 working groups. So, first of all, are you going to be collaborating more like with data on that front? And yeah, why? It sounds like to me that you're kind of doing the same thing. So how does that work?
Even got similarly named projects, and I think it's a great thing that there's so much movement in the industry. First and foremost, you can't win sustainability. It's something we're going to have to do as a collaboration across the industry. So I don't mind if everybody started launching something similar to greening and streaming, in name at least. I'd entirely encourage it, because the more we can get those conversations going, we're all heading in the right direction. That's the point. We're a not-for-profit. We're not trying to make a commercial gain out of this. I don't know if that's story similar for, I'm not speaking for Fraunhofer, but I really greatly value having those organisations in the working groups. And Ben, I think you're going to talk to that as well.
Just working group 8, which is doing the measurement of devices, our main contribution, some of the most important contribution is from Fraunhofer. I don't know if it's the right people in the room, but getting to use that API on the plugs we've chose, that, it's, so to answer that question, clearly I personally couldn't care less who belongs to what. We're just working on this project, and we're going full steam ahead. and Fraunhofer is part of the journey as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and we're sort of trying to assimilate. We're very much a forum in greening of streaming. So if we can bring groups like, I'm not going to name them because it's not quite fair because we haven't signed the ink on it yet, but groups like the others in the room, maybe the DTG who have affiliated IABM and so on, everybody should have a sustainability project going on. If we can do one thing as greening of streaming, it's helping everyone make sure they're kind of aligned. Otherwise, we're going to send off all sorts of different confusing messages to everyone. So that's where, from my point of view, that's why it's worth bringing those people into one room, even if we think we're competing. We're kind of competing to the same goal, and ultimately it's an altruistic goal. So commercially, that should be something that we're all able to do. That's my sense. How are we doing on time? I think we've got time for just another question if there is something else anyone wants to chat a little bit about. I think if not, I'm going to touch base. Rudolf, excellent. We had some data earlier. I was surprised your hand wasn't up earlier.
Well, I'll be following this a bit critically because, for example, the way the projects were presented, it was about, like reducing the amount of streaming traffic and how to deal with it. Whereas, well, if you look at the data from the French fixed networks, their energy consumption dropped last year. And the mobile network only increased with the amount of sites that they actually put extra into the country. So I haven't found any relation to traffic and energy consumption. And I'm actually worried that we're spending a lot of time on shrinking a file and then spending a lot of energy, millions of times at home, because we need to blow up that file again so that it kind of looks nice enough in HDR. Whereas we could have also just sent 20 megabits to people and handled it easily on a device. And the same goes for stuff like multicast and peer-to-peer. It requires a lot of state in the network and a lot of knowledge that drives up energy consumption. And the network is more than able to handle traffic. We're talking about 3 megabits at this moment, peak traffic, according to Telefonica, with 10% growth. So, yeah, watch out for that.
If there's one thing I've learned through running greening and streaming, it's just as you're getting up to full speed like the Roadrunner, Rudolph's leg sticks out like Wile E. Coyote, and I go bang. No, absolutely. There was a key question: deferred infrastructure. Sam mentioned it a lot. Deferred infrastructure seems like a logical thing, but as Rudolph's pointed out, sometimes making infrastructure investments reduces energy because the latest technology is more efficient. The easiest picture for that is imagine EC2, Amazon Cloud, running on Pentium 2 processors. It would be bloody huge. So, sometimes we do have to make these infrastructure investments because we get significant real reductions, not proportionate, real reductions in energy, and that's something that we need to get a handle on. That's why all this measurement is so key, to see if our assumptions are true, because if they're not, we're going to engineer the wrong solutions to problems that we're not really fixing. Okay, so at this point, I think, unless there's any other key questions anyone would like to sort of get on air at this stage, I think what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more, if the slides move. If they don't move, then maybe that's it. Oh no, there we go. Staying connected, getting involved. This is the right bit. So wanted to talk a little bit about touch points. We're not only a confusing organisation some points because we're evolving fast and sort of all very excited about what we're doing, and it's going off in all sorts of directions, which is great, but it can also be a little bit tricky keeping up with everything. Obviously, if you're on LinkedIn, you've probably seen quite a lot of our stuff spewing out at high speed, and that is one of our main regular touch points. It's usually originated, the key stories from insiders are usually originated on our blog. I skipped over the most important one. Obviously, the best way to find out about what's going on in Greening and Streaming is to become a member. So we have internal mailing lists, an internal app, which helps us all communicate and stay in touch. Most working groups meet monthly. We have a monthly members meeting, which as of next month, providing we get the overhead going, we're going to be doing as a LinkedIn Live as well. We see no reason in keeping the doors shut. We have a no greenwashing rule as the only rule of membership. So we might as well be completely transparent about where we're getting to as our monthly iterations. That doesn't necessarily mean the working groups will be live and public. We think that's a privilege of membership. We want to have slightly smaller think tanks that can be progressive rather than all get bogged down in committee decisioning at too much scale. So that's a privilege of membership in the working groups, but the output that we're doing. We're trying to make as public as possible. The volunteer secretariat are immensely important to me. We've got about a dozen. There's quite a few in the room here. They're all sage hands. I was going to use another word. They're all sage hands from the industry who I've adopted because we don't have an individual membership class. I didn't want to have a low price, affordable for an individual membership class because quite frankly running this organisation's hard work enough with 25 very large blue chips, but having another 200 individual members who essentially want to buy a t-shirt would be a bit hard work. But there are about 12 or where, you know, so basically our key people from across the industry who've shown and expressed a lot of interest and who have a lot of expertise. Simon, Barbara, you know, Rudolph, there's many of you in the room. Ben, I'm going to forget some of you, sorry if I do. But they are key to supporting me, and they are also really good touch points because they do know the industry really well. So they're invaluable to the organisation. The affiliate programme is really important. So other trade associations can join, can have one person, one of their secretariat, ideally reciprocally can be a member active in our working group. So I think JT had to leave, but JT from the SVTA, DTG, Fraunhofer we've spoken about. That affiliate program is really important because we don't want to reinvent all the standards around energy. You're doing great jobs with standards, but what we want to do is help you drive energy considerations into your memberships and learn from you as well. And then I've mentioned the app, which is members only. But this is really the last part of the of today's presentation. We are also supported by 3 sort of groups internally. And they look after events, really our media and PR output, and helping us create webinars. So I'm going to ask various different people from those groups to come and talk a little bit. Ben, can you come and talk a little bit about the new podcast that we're launching in October?
Yes, sure. Yeah. So yeah, I'm doing that with Janet Greco. So she sends her regards, and she said she couldn't come because she's offsetting the cost of your plane ride from London when there was a decent train ride. Very cool. That's her message. I've been running an event called Sustainability Expert Series with her since September 2021. We've run about 10 shows. We have a quite faithful audience, some of you in the rooms, and we have about at least 20, 25 people who have attended at least 3 events. So we have we've created a core thing. We're still finishing our summer break, and we're closing it with the first event, sponsored by Greening of Streaming. So it's a slightly different topic. It's going to be focused on media policy, on policy making. And if anybody's interested in getting involved, the first event is on October. It's the second Tuesday of October. That's really all I had to say. I mean, I could carry on talking about that longer, but while I'm here also, because, the diary, I won't come back up again. Oh, no, that's brand new. So the Flint is, the 2 Neils are in the room.
They'll have a proper introduction of that.
They'll have they'll introduce it, but I'll be, so also if you have something that you want in there, let me know. I'll be kind of the voice of Greening of Streaming in that publication, which is starting in October too.
Brilliant. Just to sort of expand on the media policy meet and greet. So I've always had a bit of an interest in public affairs when it relates to the internet, and we've got great volunteers like Rudolph who really spend their life in that space. There isn't actually a platform for any engineers to understand what's going on in the media policy space, and we have policy emerging like CDSR and other things because of the ESG, the environmental environment turning its head towards our industry. It's important we have a voice, and it's important we understand the issues. So the media policy meet and greet is really about getting some lawyers who are experts in the public affairs space to come to the room, tell us what's going on around the world with different policy changes towards content strategy, not solely sustainability. So it's going to be a bit of a broader scope. And then after we've had a weather report, we're going to dive into some of those subjects in depth on a quarterly basis. So if you're interested in that space and it will affect our industry, then please come and learn the language of the lawyers and teach them some engineering. So that would be a good thing. Barbara, can I ask you to come up and talk a little bit about how you got us here today and also the many things that you do? So.
Thank you. Great to be here. It's a nice crowd, almost standing room only. I think we can say that, right? Yeah. So I'm Barbara Lang. Some of you may know me from my former life at SMPTE. Started my own business last year in sustainability and media, and called Kibo 121. And this year, Lisa Collins and I, Lisa is detained in another meeting, but Lisa and I launched the MTSS Media Tech Sustainability Summit, which was a virtual event that we held in June this year. Neil, one of the Neils helped us directly, and I know the other Neil helped us in spirit support. Anyway, and that's how we connected also with Dom in terms of helping to deliver content. So the MTSS is, we're hoping to expand it, be more of a place of knowledge sharing, place of learning about the tech, maybe some benchmarking, lots of different things that we're hoping to do. You can go to MediaTechSustainabilitySummit.com. You can still access the content that we delivered in June. We had 16 sessions, 42 speakers talking about all the gamut of sustainability in media. And we expect to continue and grow that into the future.
Great, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, so in some ways, I look at Barbara as helping us sort out our real world event side of things and helping us get presence at things like this. It's fantastic, and so really welcome. And then we come to the Flint. Neil, come. Everyone needs two Neils. We've got two Neils. So this is awesome.
I'm going to be very brief because you're going to get two Neils for the price of one, or you buy one and you get one free. So I'll introduce Mr. Romanek in a minute. But thanks very much, Dom. And I think I'd like to pay tribute to the work that the Greening of Streaming has done, and Barbara, the MTSS especially, and the Corporate Star Awards, which I'm sure many of you will be attending later. And of course, all of the work that everybody does, because it strikes me that, as you've so rightly said, we're not just going to, nobody's going to kind of win this, and it's going to be reliant on the collaboration, the knowledge, the networks of everybody here, and the best way we can sort of pool those great resources is, I think, the way that we're going to make real progress in this conversation. And that's really where the Flint, I'd like to think, fits in, to provide a hub for the news, innovation, the latest thinking, best practice, to have those arguments, if you like, but in a safe, respectful place, with underpinned by the idea that everybody is wanting to move in the right direction to make this industry a better place to be. Okay, so I'm gonna finish there. That's what the Flint's about. Obviously, we aren't going to survive on air, no matter how clean that air is. So there is a commercial side to it, and that's where I fit in. So I'm going to follow you down to the beach, and I look forward to having some of those conversations with you about how we can build partnerships on that side of things. But more importantly, in many ways, is what we're going to talk about. Mr. Neil Romanek, I'd like you to come up and say a couple of words to the gathered masses. But thank you anyway. Thanks.
So yeah, very quickly, the other Neil, which is not very sustainable, we doubled up on the Neils. But yeah, there you are. I'm going to be that guy. I'm so sorry. Okay, hold on. Ready? Okay, I want you to all say green on the count of three. Ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Green.
He always takes 15. You're on our path.
I know, it's because I know that most of them will be terrible. But yeah, so I'm Neil Romanek. I did a magazine called Feed, which some of you may know. Feed was kind of like people said, was like Wired for the broadcast industry, sort of very kind of forward-looking technology magazine about broadcast. I finished that and spent about 6 months at Albert, BAFTA's sustainability arm. And what was really interesting there was seeing all the different silos. So seeing how production wasn't talking to streaming, and how producers weren't talking to production people, and also how different parts of the supply chain weren't talking to each other, or how advertising wasn't talking to feature films, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody had a lot of really great ideas around sustainability, and we're kind of working on these great projects and a lot of great initiatives, but it was a lot of effort was repeated and doubled up, and there was very little exchange of ideas, which you may have noticed in our industry happens. So the Flint has been designed to try to get rid of those silos and to try to cover the entire content supply chain from ideation through to distribution, or even merchandising. Beyond that some of these things that we make are actually giant plastic factories, and also to cover the different verticals. So that's sports, advertising, feature films, broadcast, because the solutions there are going to be similar for a lot of those. So I want you to go to the flint.media and sign up for the newsletter. That's your first step. We're going to launch the websites the beginning of October 4th, and we want to hear your stories. So on a monthly basis, we're going to be doing interviews, we're going to be doing case studies, we're going to be doing analyses, we're going to be doing roundtables, and hopefully be able to break down these silos and allow those people who are, right now, there's probably riders on a picket line telling everybody how unsustainable streaming is. But they have no idea, actually, how, because we don't even know. So our job is going to be able to take conversations like this and make them applicable to what everybody else in the industry is. So to actually get one part communicating with the other part. So we'll see you around in the next month.
That is why we need two Neils. That's brilliant. So, these folks are critical to getting the message of greening and streaming out there, and they're also hubs for you to get your messages out there if you're working in this space, and if you want information about this space, there's resources. So we're proud to be a seed sponsor, source sponsor, whatever you want to call us, and help them get the Flint up and running. Please go and talk to them if you want to get involved with that as well. Press, actually, it would be remiss of me not to mention Faultline. I'm going to point the finger here at the front. We have one rule in greening and streaming, and that is no greenwashing. Those of you that don't know Faultline should go and get to know Faultline. Faultline will kick you firmly in the nuts if you lie and make stuff up, right? That's what they're about. They're not sponsor-led, they're subscription-led, and that gives a completely different perspective to what they do. So they're constructively but heavily critical, and I deeply value that, and everyone in sustainability should value that, because if you start spinning, the one, actually I'm going to just throw in a small story here. Earlier this week I had to give a keynote to the internal sales meeting for one of our members, big blue chip company, lots of people in the sales group. It was all about how to marry the story of sustainability to quotas for their sales teams. And it was a really interesting challenge, because it is something that we can forget about. We do have to still make our businesses work. We have to make this relevant. If I had one message to sales teams in your own companies at the moment, sustainability is about trust at the moment. It may in the long run become a strong efficiency and bottom line sort of part of the business. But today, it's about trust. And trust can come by saying, I don't know the answer. Saying, I know the answer, and then turning out to have made it up or pulled figures that don't add up or are dissonant with what your customers are using will burn your trust. Okay, so today, at the moment, that's the most valuable thing in the commercial media space, is to develop trust by being honest with yourselves and with your customers about the data you have and the data you don't have. So yeah, big kudos to Faultline for keeping us on the straight and narrow there. So with that, that's it. That's to catch everyone up with the Less Cool projects. Thanks hugely to the project leads who've worked over the summer to sort of get the thinking into line and get things prepared. Thanks to all the people who support and all the members, most importantly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And thank you all for coming. And please come down to the beach and just have an informal chat and catch up with other people in the space.